The first time the HOA tried to have me arrested, I was standing in my own driveway with a hand truck, a mattress strapped to it, and 3 patrol cars screaming red and blue like I'd just robbed a bank. The woman behind them, perfect hair, pale blue blazer, white teeth that never quite reached her eyes, had a megaphone aimed at my face, and she was shouting, "He's squatting in a hole in the ground like that was the crime of the century." And the wild part is, I wasn't even surprised, because the day an HOA decides it gets a key to my property is the day hell freezes over, and I wasn't about to let that happen. The young deputy closest to me glanced at his older sergeant like he already regretted waking up that morning, but Barbara Sutton, president of Silver Pine Estates, didn't care about regret. She cared about control, and she'd decided I was the one thing in her neighborhood she couldn't control. So she called 911 to borrow a badge for her tantrum. "Officer," she screeched, lowering the megaphone just enough to sharpen the knife. "Why is he not in handcuffs? He's violating Section 14 of our bylaws and creating a public nuisance. Arrest him." The older sergeant cleared his throat, trying to keep the peace like he'd done it 1,000 times. "Sir, Mrs. Sutton filed a complaint about illegal construction and squatting. We need ID permits something because right now it looks bad." I took a slow sip of coffee, let the silence stretch just long enough for Barbara's smile to start forming that smug little victory grin she'd been practicing in her bathroom mirror, and I said, calm as a Sunday morning sergeant, "You might want to check the registration on this land before you reach for those cuffs. And you might want to tell Mrs. Sutton she just made the last mistake of her life." Of course, to understand why a woman with a megaphone was trying to slap cuffs on me for moving into an underground house, you've got to rewind 2 weeks back to a sealed government auction file that smelled like dust and bad decisions. I didn't find this property on some cute listing like luxury bunker, great for preppers, comes with artisanal doomsday vibes. I found it in a cold, windowless room in the basement of a county building 3 counties over where the fluorescent lights hummed like they were angry to be alive. The auction wasn't advertised. It was quiet, almost embarrassed, like the government was trying to get rid of a problem without anybody asking questions. The file was labeled Silo 19, Decommissioned Missile Facility, Cold War Relic Seized for Back Taxes, Sold as Is, No Warranties, No Questions. And I was there because I had questions, just not the kind you ask out loud. For 2 years, my team and I had been tracking a money laundering pipeline that ran through rural HOAs like blood through veins. Phantom construction projects, inflated maintenance contracts, landscaping bills that looked like they were written by someone who'd never seen a lawn, and millions moving overseas in neat, quiet transfers that didn't scream until you knew how to listen. The chatter we intercepted kept circling one phrase, Silo 19, and another phrase that made the hair on my arms lift the tunnel. A smuggling route that had been dormant since the Cold War, buried under a veneer of manicured lawns and matching mailboxes. We needed the hub. We needed the proof. And the fastest way to catch people who think they own a town is to put something in their town they can't stand, then wait for them to touch it. So I bought Silo 19. Publicly, cleanly, my name on the paperwork, a deed that was so legal it practically sang the national anthem. And the moment my bid cleared, I felt it like the air shifted, because control freaks have instincts, and somewhere in Silver Pine Estates, Barbara Sutton's little radar pinged like a submarine sonar. Something changed. When I first drove out to the property, it looked peaceful. Rolling land, a ridgeline of pines, a rusted chain-link gate with weeds curling through it, and a concrete cap barely visible under brush, like the land itself was trying to forget what was buried there. I liked it. I liked that it was quiet. I liked that it didn't have neighbors peeking through curtains. And I liked the heavy steel door set into the concrete like a heartbeat you could feel more than see. I'd just started unloading my stuff, basic living gear, a few tools, supplies, when I heard heels on gravel. That sound always hits the same way. Confident, annoyed, entitled. I turned, and there she was, marching with 2 HOA board members trailing behind like backup singers. Barbara Sutton had that "I'm doing you a favor by breathing near you" expression, a binder hugged to her chest like it was scripture. "Excuse me," she said. Not really a question. This property is within Silver Pine Estate's jurisdiction. I smiled, the polite kind you give someone right before they start acting up. It's not, I said. I checked. She flipped the binder open with a flourish. According to our annexation clause, any land adjacent to our community is subject to our standards. You'll be paying the initiation fee, $20,000, and ongoing dues, $500 per month. Retroactive, of course, because you've been a problem since the moment you arrived. One of her board members, a guy with a gelled haircut and a fake friendly grin, added, "We can do payment plans," like they were selling me a timeshare. I pulled the deed from my folder and held it out. "County line says otherwise," I said. "This isn't HOA land." Barbara didn't even read it. She snatched it, glanced at the top like reading was optional, and tore it clean in half right in front of me. The paper fluttered down between us like a dare. "Paper doesn't matter," she said sweetly. "Standards matter. And we do not allow subterranean dwellings. It's unsightly. It's unsafe. It's, frankly, disturbing." I looked past her at the pines swaying in the breeze and I said, "So let me get this straight. You came onto my land, demanded money, and tried to outlaw my house because you don't like how it looks." Barbara raised the megaphone she hadn't been carrying 5 seconds ago, like it materialized out of pure audacity. "You have 24 hours, she said. "Fill it in, leave, and stop lowering property values." And then she walked away like she'd just handed down a royal decree. If that had been the end, it would have been a petty little HOA story, annoying sure but manageable. But Barbara wasn't just a busybody. Barbara was a system. The next morning I woke up to engine noise and the crunch of heavy tires. I stepped outside and found my access road blocked by Jersey barriers and a rented bulldozer positioned like a threat. Zip-tied to the barrier was a bright orange sign, "Quarantine Zone. Suspected chemical contamination. Do not enter." My first thought was, seriously. My second thought was, that's cute. Because chemical contamination is the kind of lie that scares people without requiring proof, exactly the kind of lie a corrupt HOA loves. Barbara appeared right on schedule, flanked by a man in a cheap reflective vest, holding a clipboard like it was a weapon. "Inspector," she announced. "County Environmental. Mr. Hollis." Hollis wouldn't look me in the eye. His hands shook when he lifted his little meter. Barbara leaned in, whispering loudly enough for the universe to hear, "If you cooperate, we might be able to work something out. If you resist, well, accidents happen in rural areas." That wasn't a threat you could quote in court, but it was the kind you feel in your teeth. I could have called in my team right then. I could have ended it in an hour. But the truth is, I didn't want Barbara stopped. I wanted her exposed. I wanted her reaching for the thing she wasn't supposed to touch. So I played it slow. I took pictures. I documented the fake sign. I let Hollis talk himself into contradictions. I let Barbara perform for her little entourage. And when she finally said, "We're seizing this property pending further inspection," I stepped right up to the barrier, looked her dead in the eyes and said, "Move it." She laughed. Or what I didn't answer. I just climbed into my truck, put it in gear, and drove straight into the barrier like it was made of cardboard. The first Jersey barrier tipped, the second cracked, and the bulldozer operator nearly fell out of his seat. Gravel sprayed. The fake quarantine sign snapped off and tumbled into the weeds like it knew it didn't belong. Barbara shrieked like I'd attacked her personally. Hollis stumbled backward, his meter bouncing off his chest. I got out slow, boots crunching, and I said, "Next time you step on my land with a fake inspector and a fake sign, you're going to wish the only thing I did was knock over your little plastic blocks." Barbara's eyes narrowed to slits. "You just made this worse," she hissed. "We'll see you in court." Then she leaned closer and smiled like she was sharing a secret. "My cousin is the judge." That's the moment I felt the weight of it. Not the HOA nonsense, not the megaphone theatrics, but the rot underneath. Because when someone says that out loud, it means they've been getting away with it for a long time. The summons came 2 days later, taped to the steel door like a joke. Emergency injunction. Illegal construction. Safety hazard. Squatting. Motion for immediate inspection and demolition authorization. The paperwork was thick, confident, and written by someone who'd done this before. And for the first time since I bought the property, I had a flash of something ugly in my gut. Not fear exactly, but exhaustion. The kind that comes when you realize you're not fighting one person, you're fighting a whole little ecosystem of power favors and intimidation. That night, I sat on the tailgate of my truck, watching the sun bleed out behind the ridge, and I let myself feel it. I let the anger cool into something heavier. I thought about how easy it would be to walk away, sell the land, let the county deal with it, let Barbara keep her little kingdom. And for a minute, just a minute, I hated that thought because it felt like relief. That's the dangerous part, you know, not the threats, not the lawsuits. It's when giving up starts to sound reasonable. I actually caught myself wondering, what if I'm the problem? What if I really am some outsider waltzing in and disturbing a community, and all my "I'm right" logic is just pride wearing a nice suit? I stared at that steel door, and I felt small for the first time in a long time. Then my phone buzzed one message from my analyst, Nate Brooks, a link to a report, and a line that said, "Another widow in Pine Hollow got hit with a $12,000 special assessment. She's selling her house." That snapped something inside me clean in half. Because this wasn't about my pride. This wasn't about a weird underground house. This was about people getting squeezed until they broke, while someone like Barbara Sutton smiled and called it standards. I stood up, brushed the dust off my hands, and said out loud to nobody, "Okay, fine. Let's do it your way." Court was exactly what I expected, a room that smelled like old carpet and bad faith. Barbara sat at her table with her lawyer, Bradley Pierce expensive suit, perfect teeth, a pen that probably cost more than my truck. The judge, Harold Sutton. Yes, the cousin looked at me like I'd tracked mud onto his favorite rug. I went in wearing a faded flannel and work boots on purpose. I slouched. I kept my answers simple. I let my voice shake just enough to sell the story. "I fixed the door," I said when the judge asked about safety. "It's safe, I promise." It was a pathetic performance, and it was perfect. Judge Sutton scoffed. "This court deals in facts, not promises from squatters," he said, and he didn't even glance at the deed I had on the table. He didn't ask for my evidence. He didn't care. His gavel came down like a stamp. Motion granted. Defendant ordered to vacate. Emergency inspection warrant issued to the HOA board to enter the property and assess the need for demolition. Interference will result in contempt and jail. Barbara actually clasped her hands like a kid at a magic show. She turned to me, eyes bright with malice. "I told you," she whispered. "I own this town. Have your bags packed by noon tomorrow. I'm coming for my inspection." I let my face fall. I let her see fear. I let her drink it like wine. "You can't do this," I whispered back. Barbara leaned in, and her smile sharpened. "Oh, I just did. And tomorrow I'm ripping that metal door off its hinges and filling your little hole with cement." She swept out like she'd just won a war. I waited until the courtroom cleared, then I stood up straight, felt my spine lock back into place, and the fake tremor vanished from my hands. I walked outside, dialed Nate, and said, "She took the bait. Warrant signed. Noon tomorrow." Nate didn't even hesitate. "Copy. Sensors are primed. Trap is set. Want the team staged." "Not yet," I said. "Let her walk in. Let her feel like she owns it. I want her fingerprints on the rack. I want her authorizing the seizure on tape. Once she touches the system, we drop the hammer." That night I went underground and made the place look exactly wrong on purpose. I covered the monitors with tarps, turned the command center into what looked like a messy storage room filled with random electronics. I left one laptop open on the desk, a dummy login screen that looked like a financial interface, something a greedy person would poke at without thinking. Because here's what I'd learned about people like Barbara Sutton. They don't just want you gone. They want to know what you were hiding. The next morning the air felt thick, humid, like the sky was holding its breath. At 11:55, a convoy rolled up to the gate. Barbara's SUV in front, then a locksmith van, 2 sheriff cruisers, and a flatbed with a demolition crew. They came dressed for a victory lap. I watched from the ridgeline half a mile away through binoculars, coffee in hand, rain starting as a gentle drizzle that turned the dirt dark and slick. I wasn't inside the silo. I wasn't going to give Barbara the satisfaction of seeing me defeated. I wanted her to feel alone when she stepped into the wrong world. The locksmith worked the external gate. The deputies hovered awkwardly clearly, unsure why they were babysitting an HOA demolition party. Barbara marched to the steel door like she was approaching a throne. "Open it," she barked. The locksmith hesitated. "Ma'am, this door is industrial." Barbara slapped the warrant against his chest. "Do you see this? I have authority." The door opened. And the moment Barbara crossed the threshold, the internal sensors tripped. Down inside the system did what it was designed to do. It sealed. It logged. It recorded. It turned her arrogance into evidence. I could hear the faint echo of voices through the ventilation shafts, panic blooming in a space that suddenly didn't belong to them. 12:30. That's what my watch read when the rain started falling harder, washing dust off the driveway, washing makeup off lies. The FBI response time for a compromised site is about 20 minutes when people like me make a call. The sound of rotors cut through the rain, low thumping getting louder. 3 unmarked black helicopters crested the ridge like a nightmare with paperwork. Ropes dropped. Teams in tactical gear slid down, hit the ground running, surrounded the silo entrance with rifles raised like punctuation marks. A convoy of black SUVs tore up the drive, bypassing the shattered barriers Barbara had set like she still owned physics. The team leader planted a charge on the manual release, a small controlled blast, and the steel doors groaned open. Barbara Sutton stumbled out coughing, her perfect blazer, ruined mascara streaming down her face, hair plastered to her forehead in wet strands. She looked up expecting friendly local deputies, and instead she saw a dozen red laser dots blooming across her chest, like the universe had finally decided to draw a boundary. A voice boomed over a loudspeaker, calm and absolute. "Federal agents, get on the ground, now!" Barbara froze, eyes wide, mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find a bylaw for this. Then she saw me. I wasn't wearing flannel anymore. I had my windbreaker on dark simple with gold letters across the back that changed the temperature of the air. Barbara's gaze locked onto it, and for the first time her confidence cracked. She tried to stand anyway because control addicts always try one last time. "This is a mistake," she shrieked, voice breaking. "I am the HOA president. I have a warrant signed by Judge Sutton. You're interfering with a legal inspection." She waved the paper like it was a shield. The lead tactical officer didn't even blink. He stepped forward and kicked her legs out from under her, forcing her back down into the mud so fast her scream turned into a choke. "Stay down," he barked. "You are detained for infiltrating a federal facility. One more move and we classify you as a threat." The rain turned the ground into gray slurry, and Barbara didn't even seem to notice it soaking into the knees of her once pristine trousers. She was too busy staring at the barrel of a rifle like she'd never seen a consequence before. I walked forward, gravel crunching under my boots, and that sound made her look up. Confusion warred with rage on her face until she noticed the badge I pulled from under my jacket. Her mouth went small. "You," she whispered. "You're one of them." I crouched so we were eye level. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted her to hear every word over the rotors and the rain. "I'm not just one of them," I said, voice calm, cutting clean through the chaos. "I'm the one running the show." Barbara swallowed mud dripping from her chin. "This is entrapment," she spat, desperate for a legal word she could hide behind. I almost laughed. "Entrapment means I forced you," I said. "All I did was leave a door open. You walked through it because you couldn't stand the idea of something you didn't control." Her eyes flicked toward the entrance behind her, and I watched the realization try to form and fail. "You wanted to find a tunnel," I added softly. "You wanted to make sure your route was safe." That one landed. The blood drained out of her face so fast she looked sick. "I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. "Save it," I said, standing. "We have the logs. We have the transfers. And we have you on tape authorizing seizure you had no authority to authorize." She tried to speak again, but it came out as a strangled sound, like her throat finally understood what was happening. I turned to Nate, who'd just stepped out of an SUV headset, on eyes bright with that quiet satisfaction only evidence can bring. "Next stop," I said. "Community Center." Because Barbara had called an emergency HOA meeting earlier that morning, and the irony was almost poetic, she'd wanted an audience for my eviction, and she'd gotten an audience for her downfall. The community center parking lot was packed when we pulled up, rain streaking down windshield glass, homeowners huddled under umbrellas, gossip buzzing like electricity. The building itself was all white columns and trimmed hedges, rich people architecture that tries to look innocent. 2 agents pulled Barbara out of the SUV in handcuffs, and the moment the crowd saw her, a ripple ran through them. Confusion first, then shock. Then that quick, hungry curiosity people get when the person in charge suddenly looks human. Barbara lifted her chin anyway, trying to salvage dignity like it was an accessory. "This is illegal," she hissed at me through clenched teeth. "They'll pay for this." I leaned close just enough for her to smell the rain on my jacket. "No," I said. "You're going to pay for this." Inside the room was loud people talking over each other, expecting to watch Barbara parade my defeat like a trophy. The moment we walked in, the noise dropped into a stunned hush so sharp I could hear the rain tapping the windows. Barbara's lawyer, Bradley Pierce, stood up, face going pale as he recognized the agents. "What is the meaning of," he began, and then stopped when a U.S. Marshal stepped into view behind him. I walked to the front without hurrying because there's something satisfying about taking your time when someone else spent years rushing to crush people. I looked out at the crowd, retirees, young families, people who'd paid dues and special assessments and fines without ever knowing where the money went. "My name is Ethan Cole," I said, voice steady. "I'm with a federal task force investigating financial crimes tied to this association." Murmurs erupted. Barbara jerked against the agents. "He's lying," she shouted. "He's a squatter. He's a fraud." I nodded toward the screen behind me. Nate tapped a button, and the first image flashed up a spreadsheet of contracts, landscaping, paving, community improvements, the same vendors over and over, the same inflated amounts, the same signatures. Then transfers. Then wire routing. Then a clip Barbara in her office on camera saying, clear as day, "If we condemn the silo, we control the tunnel." A sound went through the room like air being sucked out. Barbara went rigid. That's edited," she shrieked, voice cracking. Another clip played Barbara, handing an envelope to Inspector Derek Hollis in a parking lot. Hollis nodding. Barbara saying, "Put up the contamination sign. Scare him out." People started shouting. "What tunnel? What do you mean condemn? We paid for those projects." Barbara tried to lunge for the screen like she could claw the truth back into the dark, but the agents held her. I let the chaos swell just long enough, then raised a hand. "One more thing," I said, and my voice cut through it, because authority is a funny thing. Barbara had been using it like a club for years, but the moment it came from someone real, the room listened. Judge Harold Sutton. I continued, is currently being questioned by federal authorities about his signature on a warrant that violated federal jurisdiction. That's when Barbara's face finally broke. Not anger, fear. Pure naked fear. She turned eyes wild, scanning the crowd like she expected someone to save her. But the crowd was staring back like they were seeing her for the first time, and it turns out the scariest thing for a Karen isn't handcuffs. It's losing the room. Barbara opened her mouth, and what came out wasn't a speech, it was a snarl. "You people are ungrateful," she screamed, voice shredding. "I protected property values, I kept standards. Without me, this place would be trash." Someone shouted. "You robbed us," another voice yelled. "My mom lost her house." Barbara lunged again, and the agents hauled her back, and the room erupted into a storm she couldn't control, couldn't fine, couldn't silence with a megaphone. As they dragged her toward the exit, Barbara twisted her head around and locked eyes with me, mascara-streaked hair, wetsuit ruined, and she hissed, "This isn't over." I held her gaze and said quiet enough that only she could hear, "For you, it is." The doors swung shut behind her, her shouting muffled into nothing, and the last image burned into my mind wasn't the helicopters, or the rifles, or the mud. It was the look on her face when she realized the rules she worshipped couldn't save her from the law she'd been dodging. Lesson learned: never confuse a neighborhood's bylaws with real power, because real power shows up when you least expect it, and it doesn't care about your megaphone.